Joining us right now, Michael Calderone of the Huffington Post. He's the guy who watches the media so you don't have to, and comments on it and critiques it, and often breaks big stories. Michael Calderone, I think many of us believe that David Gregory might need a shrink, but I was surprised to learn that NBC News employed a psychiatrist to improve the show's ratings. But do you understand this? What are they trying to achieve here?
So there's some debate right now whether NBC hired a psychological consultant, as the Washington Post reported on Monday, or a branding consultant, which is what the network's saying. In either event, whether this person was a shrink who's trying to figure out, what makes David Gregory tick by talking to his friends and family, or a branding consultant that's trying to create some sort of personal profile about David by similarly talking to friends and family. The question here is, David Gregory's worked at NBC now for 20 years. He's been Meet the Press host for 5 years. You would think that by now the network would have a clear understanding of who this guy is, but with the ratings dropping on Meet the Press, I think they're trying to pull out all the stops and figure out a way that David Gregory could maybe connect more to people and try to bring the show back to number one. Right now, in the first quarter of 2014, it's number 3 behind CBS and ABC.
Well, the way I read this, and I just know what I read in the newspaper. I don't know anything more. But the Washington Post started to go with this story, and they went back to NBC and said, we're going to describe this firm as a psychological consultant. Do you have any issue with that? And they said no.
Yeah.
And then when the story ran, I'm guessing David Gregory went apoplectic, and then the PR people over at NBC started scrambling. Well, it's not really a psychological consultant. What it seems to be is a branding consultant. Do we know what truth is here?
Right. So, Meet the Press's ratings have been down for a while. I wrote a piece last month, looking at this similar issue. So what really stood out in that Post story, and it was 10 or 11 paragraphs down in the story to kind of mention. But, on Twitter, anything like a psychological consultant for David Gregory, I kept seeing that, and I'm guilty of it too. I picked that line out myself and tweeted it. And so that part of the story got more attention, I think, than the overall story, which was how they're trying to retool the show and, things of that nature. So, NBC quickly pushed back on this. The thing that's not in debate is what this person did. So,
Right.
so the company that they hired was a company called Elastic Strategy, which does define itself as branding specialists, and the woman who, it's a small company, and the woman who launched it and owns it and runs it, she previously worked in marketing positions and branding positions. So, what's not in doubt is actually what the service they provided was, which was, talking to David and his friends and family. And as the Washington Post reported, this activity is what people found inside NBC found so strange. Why after 2 decades do you need to speak with David's wife and his friends about what this guy's all about? Shouldn't you by now know what this guy's all about?
You'd think they would have had a hunch.
Well, and it seems to me that the real question there is not what David's all about, but what the audience is all about.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be helpful to a show.
And right now they're trying all different sort of things. So I spoke with them last month, and they said, well, we might do more shows with the live studio audience. Now they're doing these segments, reported segments around America to show we're getting out of the Beltway. They're trying different sort of segments to spruce up the show in a way. But the fundamental issue is, it's going to come down to the host. If the host isn't connecting with people, then you can pull out all the bells and whistles, but it's just not going to work.
So many other things in the media right now, Michael Calderone, and I'd love to talk about it. Again, he's the senior media reporter for the Huffington Post. Let's start with CNN. So many people this isn't even inside the media. This has become a punchline now across the country. So much coverage on this missing Malaysian airliner. Is this a calculated decision from the highest levels of the network?
It is. I was at the CNN Upfront a couple of weeks ago, where it's just the annual event that they have for advertisers to show off new shows, bring out hosts, things like that. And I talked to Jeff Zucker, who runs CNN now, and I asked him, and I think I was one of several media reporters, all who are asking the same thing, which is, what are you guys doing with the plane? Why are you obsessively covering the plane story? And he kind of brushed it off, and he's saying, I think to him, if the audience is still there, they're going to keep covering the plane. And when I had spoke with him a few weeks ago at this CNN event, at that point in time, CNN's ratings were up pretty significantly from a few months earlier. So I think they were seeing ratings here, and they're not going to bother themselves with some media critics and media reporters, questioning their programming strategy. To a lot of people who write and follow this stuff, it does seem, like an inordinate amount of time to be focusing on this plane. And I feel like every time I turn on CNN, they're back on the plane story. But, I think they're going to stick with it until it works, and then if it's not clicking, they're going to try to find some other overarching story that they can mine day after day after day. I mean, this seems to be their strategy.
But that's unusual, Michael, isn't it? I mean, generally stories are driven, if there's interest in a story, of course, it gets a lot of coverage, but it's also driven by, are there developments?
Right.
And there haven't been any developments.
But that doesn't stop them from saying breaking news.
Yeah.
Well, any sort of ping or any quote unquote development, they'll just they'll be running that story for the next 12 hours with the breaking news banner over and over again.
Amazing.
I think they're trying to figure out what's going to work for CNN. If they're not going to do partisan talk, if they're trying to find a bigger overarching news story to just cover over and over again, and you see the banner also, it says Mystery of Flight 370. It's almost like they're creating this mini series about this plane story, and I'm surprised because I don't know why people are still tuning in when there's really no developments. But if they're seeing the ratings up, they're gonna stay on it, regardless of the fact that me and other people are all taking shots at them, or just raising questions about. There's a lot going on in the world. Why are you focused on this one story?
Michael Calderone, another big story over the last week or so was Cheryl Atkinson sort of coming out and speaking out a little bit more about her time at CBS News. And she's basically said that whenever she started to pry into certain stories like Fast and Furious or Benghazi or the IRS scandals, she would get major pushback from the network. Has CBS responded to any of this? And is this, do you think, isolated to Cheryl Atkinson, or do you think that this happens more often than we know?
I mean, CBS actually hasn't said that much in response to Cheryl Atkinson's criticism of the network since she's left there. You could see when I think it was Eric Wemple, the Washington Post, might have done a tally of how many segments she had on the news show over the past year, and it did fall dramatically. I think in the last year or two, she had significantly less segments getting on air. So. She's very passionate about certain stories, Obamacare, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, and, she's won a lot of praise, especially from conservatives, for staying on these stories. And, I wish CBS would speak more about it and say specifically what was it about the stories. Did they feel like she wasn't, really advancing these stories, or wasn't a lot of new information? What kind of got in the way? I'm really looking forward to Cheryl's book because I hope she also gets into more specifics. Okay, I was working on X story about the IRS scandal, and, at the last second, producers pulled it, and they never gave getting into really specific stories. I mean, I hope in the book she gets into some of that, and then I would love to see CBS, answer those sort of specific
for sure
programming issues.
All right, Michael Calderone, we're going to have to leave it.